Disclaimer, this video exists for the purposes of entertainment, education, and theory rebuttal. Furthermore, considering the subject of this video is game theory, I want to make it clear that this video is not an attack on MatPat as a person outside of his chosen YouTube profession. I only wish to show the flaws in his theories and practices while creating theories. Unless there is substantial evidence, it is not assumed MatPat still stands behind the video in question, and when addressing older videos, I do so in a vacuum, speaking only to MatPat's assumed mindset at the time of the video's creation. If you harass or witch hunt anyone involved with this video, I will personally disown you. Thank you. Okay, what do we have on the table for today? Who's Bowser Jr.'s mother? Pass. Yoshi's dark side. Maybe another day. How deadly is a bomb? Nah. Ow. What the heck happened? Where? Ah! The heck am I doing in Undertale World? Ugh, I must have accidentally brushed against a game theory video somewhere down the line. Those things have been making the system go crazy as of late. What did I even... Oh, there it is. The bomb one I touched for about half a second. That's what did it. Hold on. What is that? Is that the video I'm covering today? Well, that just figures, doesn't it? Wait. Is the avatar machine on the fritz too? Oh my gosh, freaking game theory. Ladies, gentlemen, and non-binaries alike, welcome to an Undertale theory, lovingly crafted by... Game Theory. No, it's not Sans' Nest. Now, I know I normally cover Mario theories, but I decided to swerve off the beaten path for a minute because this theory is actually something I felt like going off on for a very long while. You see, while the Mario timeline was the first breaking point leading to my eventual defection from the game theory fanwagon, it was really this theory that pushed me over the edge. Even after the Mario timeline and the Sans' Nest debacle that was to follow, I still regularly watched most of MatPat's content. Heck, I even watched a couple of the archived live streams after MatPat started doing those. I was getting more and more skeptical, though, and that eventually led to this. Heck, this isn't even the worst game theory. Far from it, in fact. The Mario timeline and the Mario is mental theory are both infinitely worse than this. This is the theory, though, that really got me thinking critically. This is the theory that pushed me out of my box of blind trust and got me to really think about what MatPat was trying to present to me, because boy does this theory get to be a muddled mess. Now, without further ado, let's...
So, before we begin today's episode, I need to take a moment to level with you all, because it's time I pull back the curtain of the show a bit and address a couple things.
Oh, that was in this video, wasn't it? Well, while I'm here, I might as well address this too and kill two birds with one stone. After all, this gets to be strangely relevant here the more you look at it. Now, I don't have a problem with anything he says in the latter part of this whole ordeal. Yes, I agree with everything MatPat said during the segment where he explains why the backlash he received over giving Undertale to the Pope was unfounded. Despite my gripes with MatPat, I did and still do appreciate his gesture there and agree that people really did get angry over the stupidest things regarding that. MatPat does a good job of explaining that, no problem there. No, it's the first bit of this that I have trouble with.
Now, don't get me wrong, I love this game. I really do, but doing episodes on Undertale have been some of the worst experiences that I've had in the 6 years of doing this show. The first was Sans' Nest, a theory I was so excited to share with you. In fact, it was one of, if not my favorite episode that we had done of game theory to date, because it allowed me an opportunity to talk about one of my favorite franchises growing up, Earthbound, as well as one of my favorite modern franchises of Undertale. And it was a fun episode. Now, don't get me wrong, did I in any way think that this was canon lore to the series? No. Of course not. I didn't think that Sans is actually Nest. But at the end of the day, these are theories meant to get you to think about things from a different perspective. And let's be honest here, there are a lot of similarities between Earthbound and Undertale, okay? From visual design, to actual sound effects, to even the timelines of the games. But the overwhelming negativity and ridicule that that video got was just crushing. It sucked, man. And don't get me wrong, I have gotten used to dealing with internet hate over the years. I've gotten through the Sonic is Slow controversy. I've had literal petitions written to remove me from the internet for slandering Mario's name by calling him a sociopath, but this one hurt.
Now, I don't support harassment, I don't support insulting people for no reason, and I don't support vicious mocking. Yes, you can make pot shots as long as you focus on their points and not their person. I'm not going to insult MatPat just for being MatPat. I'll insult his shoddy theory-making and tendency to cherry-pick evidence and twist it for his own devices, but I'll never try to make you believe that any of that makes MatPat a terrible person. I get it. He wants to bring people together under his little game theory flag and make a community of people that like talking about their favorite games. That's not a bad thing. I would just warn him to be extremely careful what he does with this power. All too many times I've seen people go along with MatPat's theories without taking a critical eye to them and really looking at what they're all about. Like I said, MatPat has a tendency toward cherry-picking evidence and using it only in the context he wants it used in, disregarding alternate possibilities or other bits of evidence that could debunk whatever he's claiming. If MatPat was really creating a real community of theorists, people that could really dig into their favorite media and craft interesting theories out of them with strong evidence and scientific backing, then he should be getting a lot more backlash for his practices. Instead, MatPat has unknowingly created a community of blind sheep that go by whatever MatPat tells them rather than looking at the facts for themselves. And I get it. Creators can't control their fan bases. What MatPat fans do is completely out of MatPat's control, and people will have a tendency to be biased toward their favorite content creators in the face of an argument. But he could be a little more careful about what he's feeding his sheep. Being a theorist is all about looking at the facts in every way imaginable. You can't just look at how a piece of evidence could support your theory. You also need to look at how it could debunk your theory and what its overall relevance is. If a piece of evidence could be written off as irrelevant or circumstantial, find a better piece of evidence. I bring this up because the Sans' Nest theory was filled to the brim with circumstantial evidence. Both Sans and Ness are left-handed, circumstantial. Plenty of people are left-handed. Sans has a picture of 3 unknown people sitting in his desk? Circumstantial. Those 3 people could be literally anyone as no defining features are ever specified, and it's a stretch to say that they're characters from a completely separate franchise. Papyrus has a similar pose to a Starman? So circumstantial I could vomit. This should have never been a point, period. Yes, there are times when circumstance can mean something if enough of it exists, but if your only points are random bits of extreme unfounded circumstance, you really need to rethink your theory. Take away all the circumstantial bits from the Sans' Nest theory, and what else is there? Nothing! That is why people criticize the Sans' Nest theory so badly, MatPat. It stretched way too far to connect Undertale and Earthbound. Yes, Undertale was inspired by Earthbound, but it isn't Earthbound, and that's a very important distinction to make. Undertale is its own world, completely separate from Earthbound, and trying to link the two together through circumstantial means is just begging for someone to come in and break your theory apart. It was easy bait with a ridiculous premise, which is why it climbed to the status it did. It's not because anyone believed that you thought it was canon. In all seriousness, though, it doesn't matter whether you think it's canon or not. At the end of the day, you can't take circumstantial bits and pieces and present them like it's an actual theory. Yes, you can say, look at this cool stuff I found. But the way you presented this theory made it sound like this should be the way people look at this evidence, and like it or not, someone's gonna take that at face value. Death of the artist is a fitting metaphor to use here. Whether you agree with the philosophy or not, it's important to recognize that this kind of thinking exists. To put it simply, the intentions of the creator do not matter. Only the way that the audience views the creator's work matters. That's why the way that you present your work matters so much. If you present a theory that's not supposed to be taken seriously as if it is supposed to be taken seriously, then your audience is going to take it seriously even if that wasn't your intention. That's why Mario is Mental is getting to be so much of a problem, and why people are supposedly making protests to try to get you to recant it. You might be making these theories for fun, but there's a whole horde of people out there that take your words incredibly seriously because you present them as if they're scientific fact, no matter your intentions. There's only one of 2 ways to fix this problem. Make your intentions clearer, or make your theories better. Sans' Nest was a weak theory, which is where most of its ridicule comes from. Mario is Mental is filled with twisted, cherry-picked evidence, which when combined with its controversial subject matter is about as safe a recipe as a nuclear explosion. Mario is Mental made people angry because you built a twisted narrative off of only things that supported your argument. Sans' Nest made people laugh at you because your only evidence was easily dismissed as circumstance. MatPat, you hold a lot of power in your hands. You have an audience of 11 million people. You're the biggest name in theories, heck, one of the biggest names in gaming. This is your freaking career! It's really time to stop playing these baby games with your theories and really step up to the plate. Tell me something really groundbreaking that doesn't rely on twisting evidence by the arm or dancing around circumstance. I know you can do it. You just need to try. Oh boy, that got heavy. Sorry to dwell on a tirade MatPat made in freaking February of 2017, but, well, call it me getting my own emotional baggage in the open. Back to Undertale, though, because you all certainly didn't come here to hear me lecture MatPat for heck knows how long that rant is going to be once it gets into editing. So this theory is on the infamous subject of most every Undertale theory that exists, W.D. Gaster. That's right, MatPat threw his hat into the ring to try to figure out the true identity of Mr. Spooky Scary Fun Value of 66 in 3 hecking parts. And believe me, I have yet another rant to go on about that detail, but I'm saving that for the end, so you won't have to deal with that until then. Also, this is your spoiler warning. Spoilers for everything in this game. You've been warned. Part 1 basically just details the preliminary details on Gaster that are required for the rest of this theory. As a quick synopsis, he's the one the river person refers to when they speak of the man who speaks in hands. There are 4 gray characters associated with him, 3 of them being referred to as Gaster followers that relay the only information ever given on Gaster's backstory, and one of them being the gray palette swap known as Goner Kid. Gaster was the royal scientist before Alphys that built the core. He disappeared by falling into his own creation. He's purportedly always listening, according to the Gaster followers, and it's possible that the Mystery Man sprites are his actual physical appearance. Which, I mean, it is, because the merch confirmed it, so yeah. It's all stuff everyone already knew. He then goes on to define the fun value, pegging it as a data value representing multiple different worlds with their own timelines. I don't really have anything to say about it because it pretty much checks out fine, but remember it because it's going to be important later. It's after this, though, that things really start to pick up. That's where I'm jumping back in.
From speaking to the Gaster followers, we know that an experiment went wrong and Gaster was shattered across time and space. Those are some pretty specific words. First, shattered, as in pieces of him went in many different directions. There are multiple pieces of Gaster that now exist. And then there are the operative words of time and space, meaning that these pieces ended up across many different timelines, the many different worlds, each represented by a different fun value.
Stop! Time and space does not mean multiple different worlds. By definition, each world would have its own time and its own space. Gaster wasn't shattered across multiple times and spaces. The language used is singular, time and space, meaning one time and one space. Yes, where those pieces would choose to go and what they would choose to do would differ depending on what timeline we're talking about, but that's not the point here. We're arguing semantics, and MatPat semantics are garbage.
But what other characters do we know are able to retain memories across multiple different timelines?
Why does that matter? Where did this segue come from? I thought we were talking about Gaster being shattered across time and space. It shouldn't matter if there are other characters that can remember multiple timelines. That's not the current topic of discussion, and you've given me no reason why you should be bringing this up right now because it's not currently relevant. Fix your segue, it's obviously broken.
Only 2, Flowey and Sans. Flowey tells us at the end of the Genocide run that he's lived hundreds, if not thousands of timelines, doing everything under the sun from being nice to people to torturing them. And in the True Pacifist run, Asriel, Flowey's true identity, makes mention of being able to destroy this timeline once and for all. Asriel even says the following lines: "Every time you die, your friends forget you a little more. Your life will end here in a world where no one remembers you." It's a really specific thing for Asriel to know, that killing something over and over again will cause the memories of it to fade in everyone's mind.
I cry no correlation! Logical fallacy! Logical fallacy! Think of the circumstances during the fight. Asriel's breaking down the timeline and everything's playing by his rules. The normal rules of time and space obviously aren't at play here. What Asriel's saying is just defining the rules of his reality. In his twisted time vacuum, repeated deaths would cause Frisk's friends to forget about them more and more because it's exactly the kind of thing that would make Frisk squirm. Asriel's a sadist. He'd do anything to make Frisk absolutely miserable. Okay, calm down your angry comments. I'm talking about Asriel during his fight, not Asriel after the fight. Chill yourselves. In the end, what I'm saying is that nothing about this fight should be applied to the normal workings of the Undertale world. It's an outlier, and outliers can't be used to determine trends.
In fact, we may even know someone who he's done this to. Goner Kid. Asriel's speech during the final battle is a direct parallel to the same lines we just saw Goner Kid speak a few minutes ago. A world where he no longer exists. The thought terrifies him, almost as though Asriel did this to him to the point where he does no longer exist.
Wowee, you guys! Look, it's our friend Circumstantial Evidence again! Hi there, Circumstantial Evidence! There's nothing to state that Flowey ever did anything to Goner Kid. The similarities in the theming of their words in one particular instance does not prove that Flowey and Goner Kid have anything to do with each other. Heck, it's not even a direct parallel. Learn to dismiss coincidences every once in a while, Pat. And I'm skipping the section on Sans because it's also a bunch of stuff that every Undertale weeb should know by now. Sans' shortcuts and knowledge of other timelines is nothing new here, folks.
So is it any wonder that the two characters who together manipulate time and space both wield weapons that look like this? And that, at least for Sans, this weapon, according to the sprite files, happens to be called a Gaster Blaster. Or that for Flowey, this is the weapon that he specifically calls out will destroy the timeline.
A lot of people like to bring up the Hyper Goner and supposed similarities to the Gaster Blaster. Personally, though, I don't see where the comparison comes from at all. It's probably because I don't see a skull when I look at the Hyper Goner. I see a distorted version of Azrael's face. It still has ears, after all. The weapons don't even function the same way. It may just be me, but I don't think this point holds a lot of water. Even more telling is that there's really nothing else to link Sans and Flowey together. It's more than likely that the resemblance between the Hyper Goner and the Gaster Blaster are completely coincidental because, once again, outliers don't equal trends.
In fact, as you can imagine, there's a lot more to say about the Sans-Flowey-Gaster connection.
Hey, guess how many times Flowey gets brought up in relation to Gaster after this point? Hecking none! There was no point to bringing up Flowey if you were never going to elaborate on him. Instead, you just leave unanswered questions sitting on the shelf collecting dust, promising you'll get back to them eventually, but never coming through on that promise. This comes back to the problem I'll be addressing at the end of this video, though, so keep this in the back of your mind, kiddos. As for now, though, this is the end of Part 1. We're moving right along into Part 2 now, and boy, oh boy, do things only get worse from here. But we start with this.
Also, real quick, I didn't bring it up last time, but Hyper Goner? It's a weird name for that weapon, right? Weirder still, though, is that it shares its name with Goner Kid, one of those monsters who's always associated with Gaster. Coincidence? Maybe, but I think it really supports the idea that Goner Kid, like Gaster, is someone who has been wiped clean from across the timelines.
Wow! That did absolutely nothing to help any of your points at all. It didn't connect Flowey to Gaster, and it didn't even connect Flowey to Goner Kid. As you admitted, it could very likely be a coincidence that they're both called Goner. Even if it did connect them, though, that still does nothing to connect Flowey to Gaster, which is what you should be trying to do. Quit getting off topic, it's giving me a migraine.
It's a good one, bro.
Now, most of you watching probably already know that story. You're actually expected to piece it together bit by bit from numbered lab entries scattered throughout that area of the game. But only the truly astute players will notice that one number is missing, entry 17. Is this just an error by Toby Fox? Did you lose count, buddy? 14 teen, 15, 16, 18, 19, 20?
What do you say?
Ah, nope.
You know, when I watched this for the first time back in 2017, I knew something was wrong with this statement. So I went out searching and found, would you look at that, another unused entry 17, this time actually relating to Alphys's true lab experiments. Hence, anything you're about to say about Gaster being related to Alphys's experiments can immediately be called into question. Real classy getting onto Toby for not knowing how to count, Pat. Obviously, you're the superior counter. 15, 16, 17, 17, 18, as they say. Definitely the right way to count. Try doing research sometime, Pat, because that honestly only took me 5 minutes to find the day your video came out. Get wrecked.
If you edit the game files manually and set your location to room number 264, an otherwise inaccessible room in the game, you find contained inside entry 17. And what it says is bone-chilling. Unlike all the others, this entry is written in the font of Wingdings. And if you translate those random symbols into English, it says the following, quote, entry number 17, darker yet darker. The darkness keeps growing, the shadows cutting deeper, photon readings negative. This next experiment seems very, very interesting. What do you two think? what we have just read is Gaster's final letter. But how do we know? Well, the entry is written in the font Wingdings. Definitely not one you see people dipping into all that often. And at this point, it's widely accepted that the WD in WD Gaster's name is meant to stand for the font Wingdings, just like Sans is Comic Sans and Papyrus is Papyrus.
Okay, yes, this is Gaster. But is it really his final letter, as you say? There's nothing to support that claim, and thusly I can call you out on your lack of evidence, once again making a fool out of you. MatPat goes on after this to say that the creation Gaster actually fell into wasn't the core, but the determination extractor, or I'd guess the pit beneath the determination extractor, maybe? And was shattered because his body, like that of other monsters, couldn't handle the raw amount of determination. There's not really much I can argue in this segment because I can see where MatPat is coming from here. It's after this, though.
I'm about to convince you that WD Gaster is Sans. Mind blown? Well, get ready because I'm not done. WD Gaster is also Papyrus. My theory is that in being shattered, half of Gaster's brain got infused into Sans, and the other half went to Papyrus.
That the real theory begins. Strap yourselves in, kiddos. It's gonna be a wild ride.
Now, I already know that you're going to start drawing parallels to the over-the-top claim that Sans is Ness. And yeah, I am saying that Sans is Gaster, so start the memes. Go ahead, go for it.
Throw those bad boys down in the comment section, memers. Give the man what he McFreakin' wants.
But keep an open mind, because I have a ton of evidence supporting this idea.
I expect to see a mountain.
And I'm gonna hit you with one hard piece of evidence right off the bat, since I know winning you over on this topic is gonna be an uphill battle. So obviously Sans and Papyrus are named after fonts, and as we already discussed, it seems like Gaster is the same, being named after Wingdings. Plus, all three are skeletons, so already there's some weird connection there. But let's look again at Gaster's name. It's WD Gaster. Wingdings, sure, but what's this Aster part all about? Well, Aster is a font.
And he isolated the Aster from the Gaster. This is not how you theories, MatPat. This is like taking Frisk's name and using only the Risk part of the name to try to deduce something about Frisk's character. That's not how this works. He has to be called Gaster for a reason. If it was because of the Aster font, he'd be called WD Aster, not WD Gaster. Unless you can find something more substantial, throw this line of thought in the trash. And yes, I know, MatPat is not the first one to parrot this thought. Well, you know what? I don't care! There are absolutely zero instances of the Gaster font being associated with anything theorized to be the character of Gaster. Thusly, it's a stretch to associate the font with the character solely based on the fact that it's a font and skeletons and Undertale are named after fonts. Gaster already has a font. It's Wingdings. Furthermore, if you want to say that, oh, you can take the G off because it's obviously part of the Wingdings part of his name, then you must have been dropped on your head as a child. While there are two G's present in the font name of Wingdings, they are not prominent parts of the word, and it's not even the last letter of the word, leaving this whole thing sitting on shaky ground. There's no good reason to associate the G in Gaster's name back to the Wingdings part of the equation, thusly it's another instance of shoving extreme circumstance where it doesn't belong. TLDR, this entire Aster thing is stupid. There.
And if you think the idea of one creature creating two others is far-fetched, then look no further than the Amalgamates. One creature made from multiple others glued together by determination experiments.
What? MatPat, this is stupid! The Amalgamates do not support the idea of one person turning into two. They support the idea of multiple people turning into one. That's the exact opposite of what you're trying to prove. Get better comparisons!
Or take, for instance, Shyren. On the official Tumblr of Undertale, Toby Fox, in character as Sans, immediately after making a clear reference to Gaster, mentioning someone who's listening, suggests doing research about Shyren. So I did, and found a fact that most other players don't know about. The head and body of the sprite that you fight in the game are actually two different beings, but an optical illusion makes them look like they're one single creature. It's odd, isn't it, that Toby would call attention to this unless Gaster himself was a sort of illusion. One character split across several others.
Oh, if there's one lesson I can teach all you kids through this, it's that context is freaking magic. Yes, Sans does make that "it's rude to talk about people that are listening" reference, but looking into the context of the statement and the entire post in general, it doesn't actually seem to be referring to Gaster. Instead, the post seems to be referring to arguments that have broken out in the Undertale community, which Sans is condemning, telling people to stop spreading controversy, but not to attack those that posted the controversial things. The line, "it's rude to talk about people that are listening," definitely seems to more be referring to not talking trash about the controversy spreaders when you think they're not looking, especially as it's directly followed by the line, "not everyone is as tough as my brother." Guess we can add reading to the list of things MatPat doesn't know how to do, right alongside researching and counting.
But let's continue since this is a pretty massive claim and I still don't expect you to be convinced yet. When asked about Papyrus and Sans, the Snowdin shopkeeper explains that the Skelebros just showed up one day and asserted themselves. It's a weird origin story. They're not like the other monsters. They're different in some way. Well, them being the result of a failed experiment would explain why they just showed up one day. They literally popped into existence out of a different timeline.
Wow, this is so convoluted, I'm gonna cry! Couldn't possibly be because they just moved there, could it? Plenty of NPCs at Grillby state that people from the capital were going to start moving into Snowdin. It even causes enough of a stir to get people worried about the erasure of local culture. And from the way they talk, it doesn't seem like people really voluntarily move out there on their own. That said, it would be a notable event if someone new did move in, especially if that someone happened to be as boisterous and outgoing as Papyrus, always followed by his brother Sans. There. Not so convoluted now, is it?
Need proof? Happy to provide. Look no further than the fact that Sans' song on his date and in his lab is named "It's Raining Somewhere Else." That somewhere else is a different timeline, as it parallels the line Goner Kid himself says, quote, "an umbrella, but it's not raining." Yeah, it's raining somewhere else. A kid from a lost timeline randomly talking about the rain? I don't think that's just a random coincidence. It's Toby's way of showing how this kid and the Gaster followers from these various timelines are all connected to the Skelebros.
Imagine a scenario. You're standing in the middle of a park on a clear night. I come up to you with an enormous umbrella over my head. What would you say to me? How about, "Why do you have an umbrella? It's not raining." The rain is not brought up out of nowhere. It's in response to the freaking umbrella. Learn to freaking context.
It would also explain Sans' strange hatred for humans. For a guy who seems so laid back about so many things, during your date with him, he gets deadly serious. He outright admits that if he hadn't made a promise to Toriel to protect your character, quote, "you'd be dead where you stand." Sure, he plays it off as a joke afterward, but you just don't joke about stuff like that. And we all know Sans' no-eye pose is his serious face. But why would Sans care about a human walking around? He doesn't really seem to care about anything else except for Papyrus. Well, if he truly is a part of Gaster, who shattered while trying to replicate the powers of human determination, then that's a pretty solid reason to hate mankind. He's got a vendetta, a grudge.
Or, and hear me out here, it's not because Sans has a vendetta against humans. There's actually one of three ways that we can take this line. One way would be to take it at face value as, well, a joke. It wouldn't actually be that far-fetched as a joke. Sans and Papyrus are sentries for the Royal Guard, or at least Sans is. After all, he has 4 different sentry stations we see across the many locales of the underground. Undyne even glares at him as he's sleeping at one of them during her chase sequence. By all rights, as a sentry, he should have disposed of any human he saw on sight, or at least reported them to someone who could. That would make the joke a jab at the role Sans should have played but didn't. For the darker second option, though, we could take it the exact same way as the first option, except it wasn't a joke and Sans would have definitely acted on his duties as a sentry if his promised tutorial wasn't a factor. Then there's my favorite, the third option. This one actually has nothing to do with Frisk being a human, but rather with Frisk having the power to reset. One of the things MatPat made sure to establish about Sans is that he remembers events from previous timelines. And then there's Flowey, who did his fair share of resetting before Frisk fell down and caused a lot of chaos and destruction. Flowey even flat out says that Sans cost him a lot of resets, meaning that Sans was definitely around to see it and want to do something about it. If Sans were able to recognize that Frisk had the same power Flowey had, Sans would absolutely want to act quickly to make sure this new threat was disposed of before they could ravage the underground like Flowey did, but his promised tutorial is keeping him from doing so. All three of these options are certainly easier to explain than Sans has a vendetta against humanity because he was Gaster and he fell into determination and got shattered across time and space and became Sans and then gosh dang, what is even in the heckin' point? Ugh!
Sans also has a direct connection with the Royal Scientist's lab. In a patch that came after the game's release, if the player calls Papyrus twice on the top floor of the lab, he'll say that the bag of dog food in that room looks familiar, that Sans had it in his room for a while. We also see in some versions of the True Pacifist ending that, in a surprise to all the characters, Alphys and Sans know each other. When Papyrus calls out this out-of-nowhere revelation, Alphys starts to get super nervous, until Sans deflects the question and everyone moves on. It's almost like the two of them are hiding something.
Like the Amalgamates? Like if Sans was somehow in on the Amalgamate secret and that's the only reason Alphys even knows Sans? Like that's why he deflects the question of how she knows him and that's why he brought his bag of dog food to her lab? Not because he's Gaster? Just a thought.
But here's the clincher, a detail that, to my knowledge, no one has picked up yet. We've all assumed that all the lab entries, except for the one in Wingdings, were written by Alphys, as she conducts her determination experiments. But the truth is, they're not. There's another author for about half of them, and that author is Sans. Pay close attention to the text of the entries. Half are grammatically correct, with proper punctuation and capitalization. The other half are entirely in lowercase. Who else in the game not only speaks in lowercase, but according to the note in his room, is also confirmed to write in lowercase? Sans.
Whoop, here we go. There are 21 true lab entries, obviously discounting Gaster's entry 17. Of these 21, 10 of them are written without capital letters to speak of. The thing is, though, there's definitive proof that these are still written by Alphys. Entry 11. Now that Metaton's made it big, he never talks to me anymore, except to ask when I'm going to finish his body. But I'm afraid if I finish his body, he won't need me anymore. Then we'll never be friends again. Not to mention every time I try to work on it, I just get really sweaty. Entry 21. I spend all my time at the garbage dump now. It's my element. Entry 20. Asgore left me 5 messages today. 4 about everyone being angry, 1 about this cute teacup he found that looks like me. Thanks, Asgore. The big thing about entry 20 is that said teacup can actually be found sitting on Alphys' desk. When inspecting it, it says it's a teacup shaped like a yellow lizard. It's full of soda. If that's not definitive proof that Alphys was the one that wrote that entry, I'll eat a duck. The language used in the entries does have a pattern to it, though. It's just not the pattern MatPat's trying to say it has. The lowercase writing doesn't show up for the first time until entry 9, which, surprise, surprise, also happens to be the first time that Alphys starts having doubts about the project she's gotten herself into. The entry even starts with the phrase, "things aren't going well." The lowercase then persists all the way into entry 14, which is where Alphys is starting to regain her confidence about the project once the bodies start waking up and the writing returns to normal. Entry 16 is erratic, showing Alphys panicking before the lowercase returns for entry 17 and onward, when the amalgamates have melted together and Alphys is in a terrible state of mind. If you haven't noticed by now, the writing style fluctuates with Alphys' emotions. She writes professionally when she's got her confidence, but when she starts losing it, her writing gets sloppier and more informal. This isn't the only place Alphys uses all lowercase either. She actually uses all lowercase writing in a lot of her undernet posts, showing that the trend isn't exclusive to Sans. There! We can all move on with our lives now, right?
It all seems to indicate that the "what do you two think" at the end of Gaster's entry number 17 refers not to Sans and Papyrus, but rather to Sans and Alphys, who are staying silent about what happened to Gaster that day.
But, if Sans is Gaster, how do Gaster and Sans exist at the same time? This is actually a really huge point. MatPat will continue to assert that Sans witnessed Gaster's death while still asserting that Sans and Gaster are one and the same. On top of that, saying that fun values are equal to parallel worlds also shoots all this in the foot, as in Fun World 66, Gaster supposedly exists, but so do Sans and Papyrus. This is an enormous contradiction, and it will continue to shred this theory apart right till the very end. For now, though, we're done with part 2. I'm skipping right on over into part 3, where MatPat is going to try to tell us how Papyrus fits into all this. And my good gosh, wait. Is the Avatar machine getting worse? Oh, no. I have to try to stabilize this thing before the entire theory bunker implodes on itself, or the fabric of reality gets torn to shreds, or something high-stakesy. Oh gosh, okay. Red wire crosses over the blue wire needs to touch the green wire. The
pink wire's looking grumpy. It's Friday afternoon at about 3:35, so the purple wire shouldn't be snacking or it'll spoil its dinner. Okay, move the brown wire to be with its friends, and...
Is it fixed now? No, it's worse. Well, guess we're doing the video like this now. Just wait and see if the avatar machine straightens its own situation out, I guess. So, part 3 then? Let's just jump back in and see where this takes us. But first, we have our big game theory science lesson. It's long and boring, so here's a summary for my viewers.
The two halves of the brain are indeed specialized in specific functions. The left brain is the verbal and logical center. It can break down numbers and words and analyze situations. Conversely, the right brain is the nonverbal and intuitive center. It thinks in pictures or patterns. It's involved when you're making a map or giving directions, but can only produce rudimentary words and phrases. However, it contributes the emotional context to language.
Get it? Got it? Good. I'm keeping a visual on screen just in case you forget. Also, I'm skipping ahead, but what you need to know is that MatPat pegs Papyrus as the right brain for his emotionally driven tendencies and pegs Sans as the left brain for his supposed logic, supposed because I'm getting back to this later, and wit, especially where wordplay is concerned. Ready to jump back in now? I don't care, we're doing it anyway.
So let's take a minute to look at the Skelebros puzzle section in Snowden. Throughout this iconic section of the game, Papyrus and Sans present you with various challenges to block your progress. Papyrus's challenges are all spatially focused, doing things like forcing you to map out a walking path so as not to step on the same switch twice, puzzles that require the right brain to solve. On the other hand, the one challenge that Sans presents you with, the Monster Kids word search, a language-based task, is one specifically oriented from the left brain. So are the left and right halves of your mind blown yet? Well, if not, it keeps going. One detail I always thought was weird was the game going out of its way to tell you which type of puzzle in the newspaper the two brothers find more difficult. Sans insists that the word search is harder.
Huh? Ah! Did you see it? Did you see the point I'm about to slam on a MatPat's head? If not, you'll see it in a hot second.
But Papyrus thinks that the word jumble is harder. A word jumble involves taking a series of letters, breaking them down, and rearranging them to find the words that's made of those letters. It makes sense then that Papyrus, as the right brain, would find it more difficult. It's about forming words, a specifically language-based process, and why Sans, as the left brain, would find it easier. On the other hand, a word search, while still a left brain activity, involves identifying already existing words within a giant collage of letters. Since it's just identifying patterns of existing letters, it would make sense why the creative pattern-based Papyrus would find that easier, and why Sans would think it's a bit harder than the jumble.
What is it, MatPat? Is a word search a left brain activity or a right brain activity? For the sake of making arguments, you can't have it both ways. That's cheating. Also, keep a lookout for that other point right about...
It's crazy, right, how these details line up.
Now. Yep. Uh-huh. You see it now, right? If not, you're just as bad at reading as MatPat is. This entire point was based around Sans complaining about the word search. In actuality, Sans never complains about the word search. He actually complains about the crossword, which ends up making a world of difference to this argument. You see, a crossword isn't a right brain activity. A crossword uses logic to think up the words being described by the clues, which must then be filled into the boxes. A crossword is a decidedly left brain activity. Sans shouldn't be having any trouble with left brain activities like a crossword if he himself is the embodiment of a left brain, though. That alone puts this whole left brain, right brain claim on thin freaking ice. Ice. That's a pun.
But if that still wasn't enough, even the humor of these two matches up with their appropriate brain hemisphere. Papyrus, as the right brain, would be much more prone to physical comedy, his so-called japes. Sans, as the left brain and linguistic center, would get endless amounts of joy out of wordplay. Things like, say, bad puns. Oh well, wouldn't you know?
This point is really strange to me. Because it's actually a known fact that Papyrus actually secretly enjoys puns too. End of a true pacifist route. After Papyrus disses Toriel's pun, Toriel notes that he's smiling anyway. Call with Undyne in front of his shed. When Undyne calls the tool shed a cool shed, Papyrus unironically says he's glad he and Undyne are friends so she can enrich his life with shed-based puns. The first scene Papyrus is ever seen in. Sans remarks that Papyrus is smiling at his puns, and also Papyrus makes his own freaking pun and then laughs at it. This is just a few examples, but I think you get the picture.
And a happy baseball head. Oh, yeah.
Then there's the true pacifist ending, where Papyrus doesn't know the word for sun, having to rely on Sans to tell him. Yet another language-based knowledge item, and yet another odd detail that gets explained away by the split brain theory.
Or by the fact that Papyrus has never seen the sun before after living underground his entire life, and thus would not know what the sun is. After all, Papyrus wouldn't be the one to look into this kind of thing. Sans would, though. It has nothing to do with left and right brains. It has to do with Papyrus being ignorant to the surface world and Sans hecking knowing what the sun is. This isn't hard. Jeez, this exact same point came up in Sans' nest, and frick.
Even their handedness aligns. Sans greets the protagonist with a handshake using his left hand, holds and drinks a ketchup bottle with his left hand while dining brownies, steers a tricycle using his left hand in the true pacifist spreads, and even manipulates gravity during the genocide boss battle with, you guessed it, his left hand. Now, admittedly, you don't see Papyrus move quite as much, but he does scratch his chin with his right hand. It actually would be a lot more comfortable doing with your down inside. And yes, a quick disclaimer, since I know it's going to appear in the comments, I know that handedness is at least partially controlled by the opposite hemisphere of the brain, but I'm saying from a symbolic left-right perspective and not a functional one.
Oh my gosh, dang it, Mad Pat. You're not supposed to be doing my job for me. It doesn't hecking matter if you're stating it in a symbolic manner. It's still wrong. You've been trying to argue this from a scientific standpoint for this entire video. You don't get to just flip-flop on this now. That's cheating. Again. My gosh, I need to calm the heck down before Mad Pat hecking kills me. Good gosh.
But just like the slap chop guy, I'm still not done, because if we want to dive into semantics, we can even use the names of the skeletons to connect them even further. As we mentioned last episode, W.D. Gaster's name appears to be a combination of two different fonts, Wingdings and Aster. Wingdings is a completely silly font. It's a joke, nearly unreadable to anyone who doesn't know how to decode it. This lines up with the ridiculous, scheming Papyrus. Aster, on the other hand, is a very serious, very color between the lines, normal-looking font. And this lines up with Sans, who, despite his jokester appearance, is very serious underneath, casting judgment on you in the final minutes of the game, holding down multiple jobs, having some mysterious role in the determination experiments, being very focused into his research on the time-space continuum.
This entire theory is turning into word soup. I don't understand what Mad Pat is trying to get at with any of this. He said he was going to look at the Skeleton Brothers' names, then made a complete 180 and turned it back around to Gaster. Also, how is Sans serious? He makes jokes all the time, he's lazy, sleeps on the job all the time, he doesn't try to stop you unless you've killed literally everyone else in the underground except himself at Asgore. He does goofy crap all the time, like drinking ketchup and selling tickets made of toilet paper at Chiron's concert, so on and so forth, freaking end me. Also, Gaster's two fonts are not the fonts the Skeleton Brothers actually use, save for debatedly Sans sleeping, and I say debatedly because wow, that could hecking be any generic serif font under the face of the sun, and I already mentioned why the Aster point is garbage. Thereby, they do not get to be factored into their personalities. Oh, but we're not done yet. Mad Pat still has more to go. Save me.
You know what they say? No, what do they say? China today, hot tamale. I don't think they say that.
And then what about his connection with Gaster? Well, like Sans, he's also able to manipulate gravity, once again implying that they are two halves of the same whole. It's also worth noting that it's the only one of the soul modes that actually manipulates a spatial law. Green gives you a shield, yellow is had by pressing a button, and purple is a bunch of spider webs, but blue changes gravity. It's no small feat.
Great, cool, yes. How does that connect him to Gaster in any way at all?
But it goes beyond that. In one of the patches to the game, if you stop a genocide run by sparing Papyrus, he says that it's good you stopped when it did. If you hadn't, he would have had to use his special attack, and that the player would have been, quote, blasted. He then quickly changes the subject, but it's an odd choice of words, right? Blasted seems to imply him also having the ability to use a Gaster blaster. And just to clarify, his special attack is not changing the heart to blue, because he starts referencing the special attack after turning the heart blue. And it's also not the giant bone that he uses to end the battle, since the annoying dog steals the special attack, and he winds up having to use a normal attack which features that giant bone.
I could also argue how this is proof that Papyrus is Gaster. If what Papyrus is talking about is really the Gaster Blaster, then it's a thing that can be stolen by characters such as the annoying dog. In fact, it seems like it's more like a weapon than an attack, taking that into consideration. Who's to say that this isn't something that could be passed around between, well, anyone? It's not a stretch to say that Papyrus and Sans picked up the blasters after Gaster's disappearance, or even that Gaster made the blasters for them. This is not proof that says Sans and Papyrus are Gaster.
It's also important to note that this odd detail was included in a patch to the game, especially when other details added during those exact same patches were making Gaster a more official part of the game experience. You no longer had to hack into the game's fun value in order to experience Gaster as a real part of the game's lore.
Golly, I never knew that Burger Pants was also related to Gaster, seeing as that same patch also added some dialogue for everyone's favorite fatalistic fast food drone. Who knew? In actuality, the patch that MatPat is talking about, V1.001, was the very first update for Undertale, and as such included a hecking lot of things. Not all of them relate to Gaster. This point definitely could have been left out. Throw it out, MatPat.
Go get the mango! Go get the mango! Go get the mango!
Were they created when Gaster fell into his machine, or were they present throughout the whole series of experiments? It's not really clear. I personally like to think the former, but the pictures in Sans' laboratory of 3 smiling faces with the quote, "never forget," seems to imply the latter.
Except that the latter kills your entire theory because Gaster can't have split into 2 parts to make Sans and Papyrus if they already existed.
Furthermore, in light of newer evidence, we have reason to think that this picture may actually be referring to Undertale's not-sequel alternate universe sister, Deltarune. The photograph contains 3 people, who could be Chris, Susie, and Ralsei, and the words "Don't Forget," which is the name of the main theme song of Deltarune. Furthermore, the picture only appears there when the player is able to talk to the clam girl and learn of her neighbor's daughter, Susie. Funny enough, this is an event that has changed a number of times. V1.001 added a line where the clam girl says that Susie might be why you came here in the first place. Most telling is the Nintendo Switch version of the game, where the clam girl says that the player's time to meet Susie is fast approaching. The Switch version of Undertale released on August 28, 2018, while Deltarune released just 2 months later on October 31st, 2018. Now, admittedly, Clam Girl's Switch event does have one other factor to it that would seem to be in support of MatPat's theory on a base level. Clam Girl's sprite after the conversation turns gray like the Gaster followers and is named Goner, and she disappears in a manner identical to Gaster himself. This still doesn't confirm MatPat's theory, however, as this only confirms that Gaster has some relation to whatever is going on with this one particular instance, maybe. And I say maybe because we're not even sure of Gaster's true nature or if he's even capable of doing things besides, well, not existing anymore. We also have to remember that the point that MatPat is trying to make is that this picture shows Sans in some capacity, which is flat out not true because of the fact that the people in the picture are never revealed outright, which would make no sense if the picture was supposed to include people that Frisk knows. Come on, MatPat, get yourself together here!
Either way, this is how our story and the theory ends. Because as Toby Fox himself confirmed on Twitter, quote, "You've all seen the happiest outcome. Neither of them could fix the machine, no matter how hard they tried. No one can."
Wow, a vague tweet that Toby never gave any context to. Great. Finally, I think I promised all of you one last rant. Conveniently, it also spills over into my final thoughts, so I might as well start now that this theory is over. Something really got me about this whole thing. Something important.
Part 1, because there's a lot to cover here. And like, seriously, if those opening stories weren't enough to convince you that I would love for this to be a single-parter, then I don't know what to tell you. I know 2-parters get a ton of hate, and the last thing that I want is more internet shade to be thrown at me on an Undertale video. But I want to give this theory the time and research that it deserves. So just trust me that it has to be 2 parts for my own sanity and to make this a better viewing experience for you. Because otherwise it would be an under-edited, overly rushed 1-part episode where I crammed in everything and didn't do a good job of explaining it all, okay?
2-parter. You heard that like I did, right? Fast forward to the end of video 2, though.
Well, that's for the final episode on this topic where we tie up all the lingering mysteries of Undertale. I've already crammed a ton of stuff into this episode to make it into a manageable length, and I don't want to rush through some of these awesome final revelations.
Suddenly, it's a 3-parter.
Seriously though, I'm sorry that this turned into a 3-parter. It was meant purely to stop at 2, but as I kept digging and writing, I kept finding more and more that I had to cover. Contrary to what many people have said, Toby Fox hid a ton of clues about this hidden storyline throughout the game, so I want to be as thorough as possible in covering it all, to do it the justice that it deserves.
That's disturbing. For those of you that can't immediately see what that means that MatPat didn't script his other 2 parts before scripting the first one. In fact, it means he didn't even start scripting the second part until he'd already sent the first one off to his editor. I don't care how confident you are about your points, you should never be doing this. Always write the scripts for your multi-parters together. That way you're not missing points and making contradictions that you could have avoided by keeping everything neat, tidy, and together. It helps you to avoid embarrassing mistakes like, realizing that you have no pertinent information to tie Flowey to Gaster after having already promised a connection, so you drop him like a fresh Hot Pocket and hope no one will notice. I can't confirm that that's what actually happened, but if MatPat can assume Toby's intentions, then I can assume MatPat's. It's only fair. This entire theory just felt disjointed and janky. Points were left floating in the air where they didn't need to be, nothing felt like it really connected at all, and it just felt like a huge information dump where nothing was ever solved. It's like I just listened to MatPat nerd out about 15 different unrelated things at once. His efforts to tie everything back to Gaster were really weak, and at times it felt like he wasn't even trying. What he needed to do was write the scripts for all 3 parts at the same time and look back at all of them in relation to each other, combing through each for contradictions and loose ends to tie up and fix. Learning how to read could have also helped. MatPat seemed to have some big problems with that this time around. Well, I guess that's over. Time to cover a Mario theory while I still have this Mario avatar to work with. Oh, come the heck on!